Amelia was a name that carried weight in both her hometown and the bustling city where she worked. As a high-ranking government official, she was admired for her intelligence, charm, and seemingly unwavering dedication to public service. In her hometown, she was a hero, a symbol of success and integrity. People spoke of her with pride, often saying, "Amelia is one of us. She hasn't forgotten where she came from." But behind the polished facade of her public image lay a darker truth. Amelia's rise to power hadn't been as clean as everyone believed. In the city, far from the watchful eyes of her hometown, she had made deals with corrupt businessmen, accepted bribes, and manipulated policies to benefit herself and her allies. She had become a master of deception, hiding her true nature behind a mask of kindness and professionalism. Her family and friends back home had no idea. To them, Emilia was still the same humble girl who had left the town years ago to chase her dreams. They believed she was working tirelessly to make the world a better place. Little did they know, her actions were destroying lives. Families were losing their homes, small businesses were being crushed, and innocent people were suffering because of her greed. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Emilia decided to drive back to her hometown. She hadn't visited in months, and her family was eagerly waiting for her. As she sped down the dark, winding road, her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the latest deal she had struck, a deal that would make her even richer, but would ruin countless lives. Suddenly, a truck appeared out of nowhere. Emilia swerved, but it was too late. The collision was catastrophic. Her car flipped multiple times before coming to a stop in a ditch. When the paramedics arrived, they found her lifeless body, her face frozen in an expression of shock. The news of Amelia's death spread quickly. The town was in mourning. How could someone so young and full of promise be gone so suddenly? Her funeral was arranged, and the entire town gathered to pay their respects. But what happened next would change everything. The church was packed, every seat filled with mourners who had come to pay their respects to Amelia. Her casket, draped in white silk, stood at the front, surrounded by flowers and candles. The air was heavy with grief, but there was also an undercurrent of unease. Rumors had been swirling since her death. Whispers of strange occurrences, of shadows moving where they shouldn't, of a lingering sense of dread. The priest began the eulogy, his voice trembling slightly. "Amelia was a beacon of hope for this town," he said. "She was kind, generous, and always willing to help those in need." But as he spoke, a low murmur began to ripple through the crowd. People shifted in their seats, their eyes darting toward the casket. Something was wrong. At first it was subtle, a faint twitch of Amelia's hand, a slight movement of her head. Then her face began to change. Her skin darkened, her features twisted, and her nose elongated into a snout. Her ears grew pointed and her teeth sharpened into fangs. Within moments, Amelia's face had transformed into that of a dog. Gasps turned into screams as the crowd recoiled in horror. The priest dropped his Bible, his face pale with shock. Amelia's mother fainted and her father collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The church erupted into chaos as people scrambled to get out, knocking over chairs and trampling on flowers. Outside, the sky darkened, and a cold wind swept through the town, as if nature itself was reacting to the unnatural event. The news spread like wildfire. By nightfall, the entire town was talking about the transformation. Some called it a miracle, others a curse. But one thing was clear. Amelia's death was not the end of the story. Something sinister was at play, and the truth was about to unravel in ways no one could have imagined. The next morning, the town was in a state of panic. The church was cordoned off, and the local authorities were at a loss for how to explain what had happened. Amelia's body was still inside, her transformed face a grim reminder of the inexplicable event. People gathered in small groups, whispering theories and casting nervous glances toward the church. That's when the stranger arrived. She was a tall, imposing woman, dressed in a long black coat, her face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Her presence was commanding, and the crowd instinctively parted as she walked toward the church. She introduced herself as Clara, a journalist from the city who had been investigating Amelia for years. "I know why this happened," Clara announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "And I know the truth about Amelia." The townsfolk fell silent, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Clara stepped onto the church steps and turned to face the crowd. Amelia was not the person you thought she was, she began. She was corrupt, manipulative, and cruel. She used her position to destroy lives, all while maintaining the facade of a saint. As Clara spoke, she pulled out a folder filled with documents and photographs. She handed them to the crowd, revealing evidence of Amelia's crimes, bribes, forged documents, and letters from people whose lives had been ruined by her actions. The townsfolk stared at the evidence in disbelief, their grief turning to anger and betrayal. But Clara wasn't finished. "There's more," she said, her voice lowering to a whisper. Amelia's transformation wasn't just a punishment, it was a warning. She made a deal with someone or something to gain her power. And now, that debt has come due. The crowd gasped, their fear palpable. Clara's words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice from the back of the crowd shouted, "What do you mean?" "What kind of deal?" Clara hesitated, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I don't know all the details," she admitted, "but I do know this. Amelia's death is just the beginning. Whoever or whatever she made that deal with is still out there, and it's not done yet." The crowd erupted into chaos, their fear and anger boiling over. Amelia's family, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd, looked on in stunned silence. They had no idea their daughter had been involved in something so dark. As Clara stepped down from the church steps, a sudden gust of wind swept through the town, extinguishing the candles and plunging the square into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, Clara was gone, leaving behind only the folder of evidence and a lingering sense of dread. The town was in turmoil. Clara's disappearance only added to the growing sense of unease. The folder she left behind became the center of attention, with people poring over its contents, trying to make sense of Amelia's double life. The evidence was damning: bribes, blackmail, and even connections to criminal organizations. But the most chilling revelation was a single cryptic note written in Amelia's handwriting. "I made the deal. I thought I could control it, but it's too powerful. If you're reading this, it's already too late. They're coming." No one knew what it meant, but the words sent shivers down everyone's spines. Amelia's family, desperate for answers, decided to search her old home in the town. They hadn't been there in years, as Amelia had insisted on keeping it locked up. When they arrived, they found the house in disarray: furniture overturned, walls scratched, and strange symbols etched into the floor. In the attic, they discovered a hidden room. Inside was an altar covered in black candles and surrounded by strange artifacts. At the center of the altar was a small leather-bound book. Amelia's father picked it up with trembling hands and began to read. The book was a diary detailing Amelia's descent into darkness. "I was desperate," one entry read. "I wanted power, influence, and wealth. I didn't care how I got it. That's when I met him. He promised me everything I wanted, but there was a price. I didn't understand what I was agreeing to until it was too late." The entries grew more frantic as they went on, with Amelia describing strange occurrences: voices in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and a growing sense of being watched. The final entry was dated the day before her death. "It's here. I can feel it. I thought I could outsmart it, but I was wrong. It's coming for me, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. If anyone finds this, please, destroy the altar. Burn it. Don't let it take anyone else." Amelia's family was horrified. They had no idea their daughter had been involved in something so dark. As they read the final entry, a loud crash echoed through the house. They turned to see the attic door slam shut, plunging them into darkness. The candles on the altar flickered to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A low guttural growl filled the room, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Amelia's father grabbed the diary and shouted, "We need to get out of here, now!" They stumbled down the stairs, the growling growing louder behind them. As they reached the front door, they heard a voice, a deep, inhuman voice, whisper Amelia's name. They burst out of the house and into the daylight, their hearts pounding. The town gathered around them as they shared what they had found. The diary and the altar confirmed Clara's claims. Amelia had made a deal with something evil, and now it was coming for the town. The discovery of Amelia's hidden room and the diary sent shockwaves through the town. The once peaceful community was now gripped by fear and paranoia. People locked their doors at night, afraid of the shadows that seemed to move on their own. Strange occurrences became commonplace. Lights flickering, animals acting erratically, and whispers heard in empty rooms. The town's leaders called an emergency meeting to decide what to do. Amelia's father, still shaken from the encounter in the house, urged them to destroy the altar and burn the diary. "We have to stop this before it's too late," he said, his voice trembling. "Amelia's mistakes shouldn't cost us our lives." But not everyone agreed. Some believed the altar and the diary were their only clues to understanding what was happening. "What if destroying it makes things worse?" one man argued. "We need to know what we're dealing with." As the debate raged on, a sudden scream echoed from outside the meeting hall. The crowd rushed out to find a woman lying on the ground, her face pale with terror. She pointed toward the church, where a dark figure stood in the doorway. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The figure stepped forward, and the crowd recoiled in horror. It wasn't human. Its form shifted and twisted, as if made of smoke and shadow. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the square. "You cannot escape. The deal has been made. The debt must be paid." Panic erupted as people fled in all directions. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. The town's leaders, now convinced of the danger, agreed to destroy the altar and the diary. But as they prepared to do so, they realized something was missing. The diary was gone. The disappearance of the diary sent the town into a frenzy. Without it, they had no way of understanding the full extent of Amelia's deal or how to break it. The townsfolk began to turn on each other, suspicion and fear driving wedges between neighbors. Accusations flew, and some even claimed to have seen the diary in the hands of others. Amelia's family, desperate to end the nightmare, decided to take matters into their own hands. They gathered a small group of trusted friends and set out to search for the diary. Their first stop was Amelia's old house, where they hoped to find clues about where it might have gone. As they entered the house, they were struck by how different it felt. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The hidden room in the attic was exactly as they had left it, but the altar was now covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. "This doesn't make sense," Amelia's brother muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were just here yesterday." As they searched the room, they found a small, hidden compartment beneath the altar. Inside was a note, written in the same cryptic handwriting as the diary. "If you're reading this, it means the diary has been taken. It's not safe. The one who took it is already under its control. Find Clara. She knows more than she told you." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Clara had disappeared after her shocking revelation, and no one had seen her since. But if she knew more about what was happening, she might be their only hope. As they left the house, they noticed something strange. The streets were eerily quiet. The town, usually bustling with activity, was now deserted. The only sound was the faint whisper of the wind, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. They decided to split up to cover more ground. Amelia's father and brother went to search the church, while her mother and a few others headed to the outskirts of town, where Clara had last been seen. At the church, Amelia's father and brother found the doors locked. But as they approached, they heard a faint sound coming from inside, a low, rhythmic chanting. They forced the doors open and were met with a chilling sight. A group of townsfolk, their eyes glazed over and their movements mechanical, stood in a circle around the altar. In the center was the diary, open to a page covered in strange symbols. The air was thick with an unnatural energy, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Before they could react, the townsfolk turned toward them, their faces blank and expressionless. In unison, they spoke in a voice that was not their own. The debt must be paid. The scene in the church was horrifying. The townsfolk, now under the control of whatever dark force Amelia had unleashed, advanced toward Amelia's father and brother. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The diary lay open on the altar, its pages glowing as if alive. Amelia's father, though terrified, knew what he had to do. "We have to destroy the diary," he shouted to his son. "It's the only way to stop this." But before they could act, the controlled townsfolk surrounded them, blocking their path to the altar. The chanting grew louder, the air thick with an oppressive energy. Amelia's brother grabbed a nearby candlestick and swung it at the nearest person, knocking them to the ground. "Go!" he yelled to his father. "I'll hold them off." Emilia's father hesitated for only a moment before rushing toward the altar. The diary's pages seemed to writhe as he approached, as if aware of his intentions. He grabbed the book, his hands trembling, and began to tear out the pages. But as he did, the shadows in the room began to converge, forming a dark, shapeless figure with glowing red eyes. "You cannot destroy what has been bound," the figure hissed, its voice echoing through the church. "The deal was made. The debt must be paid." Emilia's father stood his ground, clutching the torn pages. "My daughter made a mistake," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "But we won't let her destroy this town. Whatever you are, you have no power here anymore." With that, he threw the torn pages into the air and lit them with a match. The flames spread quickly, consuming the diary and the strange symbols on its pages. The dark figure let out a deafening roar, its form flickering and dissolving as the fire grew. The controlled townsfolk collapsed to the ground, their eyes returning to normal as the dark energy left them. The chanting stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The church was silent, save for the crackling of the flames. Outside, the town began to stir. The unnatural darkness that had hung over it for days began to dissipate, replaced by the warm light of the sun. People emerged from their homes confused but free from the fear that had gripped them. Emilia's family reunited in the church, their faces etched with relief and sorrow. They had stopped the darkness, but the cost had been high. Emilia's legacy was forever tarnished, and the town would never be the same. As they left the church, they noticed something strange. The casket where Emilia's body had lain was now empty. Her transformed face was gone, as if she had never been there. Some believed it was a sign that she had finally found peace, while others feared it meant the darkness was not entirely gone. The town slowly began to rebuild, but the memory of what had happened lingered. Emilia's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the consequences of making deals with forces beyond understanding. And in the shadows somewhere far away, a faint whisper could still be heard. The debt must be paid.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.